The entire restaurant plunged into silence. You could hear a pin drop on the marble floor. Julian Blackwood, the city's most eligible billionaire bachelor, had just said the most absurd thing imaginable. He pointed his finger, adorned with diamond cufflinks, at the trembling waitress drenched in cursed champagne and smirked. "You want me to forgive your clumsiness? Fine. Sing this Mozart aria perfectly, and I'll marry you right here and now." The room exploded with cruel laughter. His fiancée smirked, expecting her to run away sobbing. But they didn't know who she really was. They didn't know that the girl in the cheap uniform was about to open her mouth and bring the most influential man in New York to his knees. This is the story of Elena Vance and the song that changed everything. The Obsidian Hall was not just a restaurant, it was a theater of wealth. And tonight, the audience was particularly cruel. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen tears, casting fractured light on politicians, oil magnates, and tech geniuses dining on caviar worth more than a compact car. Elena Vance adjusted the collar of her stiff black uniform. It chafed her neck, constantly reminding her of her position. She was invisible here, a ghost moving between tables, refilling water glasses, clearing silver plates, and absorbing the casual disdain of the city's elite. "More wine," a voice snapped sharply. Elena turned, lowering her eyes. "Of course, miss." Thorne sat at the central table, the undisputed queen of the evening. She wore a red silk dress that looked as if it had been poured onto her body. On her finger sat a diamond heavy enough to leave a bruise. Next to her sat the man who had bought it, Julian Blackwood. Julian was staring at his phone, looking utterly bored. He was 32, with sharp, devastating features that graced the covers of Forbes and GQ in the same month. He was the CEO of Blackwood Dynamics, a man who moved markets with a whisper. However, tonight he looked as if he'd rather be anywhere but listening to his fiancée's complaints about the garnish on her lobster. "Julian, are you listening?" Isabella hissed, her perfectly manicured nails tapping on the tablecloth. "I said the soprano they hired for the wedding is clearly mediocre. I won't tolerate mediocrity at a Blackwood wedding. It reflects poorly on my brand." Julian sighed, finally putting his phone away in his tuxedo pocket. His eyes were dark, intelligent, and weary. "Isabella, it's a wedding, not a coronation. No one will critique the singer's vibrato at a wedding unless they're drunk on vintage champagne." "I will," Isabella retorted coldly. Elena approached with a bottle of Pinot Noir. Her hands were steady, they always were, but her heart pounded against her ribs. Being this close to Julian Blackwood was unnerving. It wasn't just his wealth, it was the intensity of his presence. He seemed to see everything, even when he wasn't looking. As Elena leaned in to pour, a waiter from the kitchen rushed past, shoving her hard in the shoulder. It happened in slow motion. The bottle slipped, dark red wine arced through the air, and splashed onto Isabella's impeccable red dress. The gasp that echoed from the surrounding tables sucked the air out of the room. "You wretched little rat!" Isabella squealed, jumping to her feet. Her chair screeched across the marble. "Look what you've done. This is custom couture." Elena paled. "I'm so sorry, miss. I was pushed. I don't care about your excuses." Isabella grabbed a cloth napkin and desperately rubbed the stain, which only made it worse. She directed her fury at Elena, her eyes blazing with malice. "Manager. Where's the manager? I want this girl fired. No, I want her blacklisted from every service job on Manhattan." Marcus, the floor manager, appeared instantly, sweating profusely. "Miss Thorne, Mr. Blackwood, I offer my deepest apologies. Elena, go to the kitchen immediately. You're fired. Wait." One word cut through the chaos like a knife. Julian Blackwood. He sat there, swirling the remaining wine in his glass. He looked up, his expression inscrutable. "Julian, don't interfere," Isabella snapped. "She ruined my dress." "It was an accident, Isabella," Julian said, his voice deep and smooth. "And honestly, the wine complements the silk. It's an improvement." Someone at a nearby table stifled a laugh. Isabella's face turned crimson with rage. "You're defending the help?" Julian looked at Elena for the first time. He saw the frayed collar, the tired eyes, the strands of brown hair escaping her bun. But he also saw something else. She wasn't crying. She stood straight, her jaw clenched. She was terrified, yes, but she wasn't broken. That intrigued him. I'm just saying, Julian drawled, leaning back, firing her seems boring. We are celebrating our engagement, aren't we? Let's have some fun. Fun? Elena whispered, her voice barely audible. Julian stood, towering over her. He walked to the small stage where a string quartet had just finished a light serenade. On the music stand was an open score, an incredibly complex aria from Mozart's The Magic Flute, specifically, the Queen of the Night's aria. The hired soprano had struggled with it earlier that evening. Julian picked up the score. He looked at Isabella, a cruel glint in his eyes. He was tired of Isabella's pretensions, tired of her calling herself a patron of the arts when she couldn't tell Mozart from Madonna. He wanted to highlight the absurdity of her demands. All right, Julian said, his voice carrying through the silent restaurant. Isabella says you have no talent, no dignity, just clumsiness that ruins expensive things. But I believe talent can hide in the grimiest places. He returned to Elena and thrust the score into her hands. Sing this, he said, his voice laced with dark sarcasm. This is the Queen of the Night. It requires high FS. If you can sing it, I mean really sing it, not screech like a dying cat, I'll stop Marcus from firing you. He paused, an evil smile curling his lips as he looked at the stunned crowd. He decided to raise the stakes to an impossible level, just to mock the sanctity of his own engagement. In fact, Julian announced loudly, if you can sing this Mozart perfectly, I'll dump Isabella and marry you instead. The room gasped. Isabella's mouth dropped. Julian, this isn't funny. I'm dead serious, Julian lied, his eyes locking onto Elena's. Come on, waitress. Sing for your supper, or for $1 billion. It was a cruel joke. A billionaire mocking a servant, giving her an impossible task. Everyone expected Elena to break, to crumple the paper and flee to the kitchen. Elena looked at the score, the notes swam before her eyes. Queen of the Night. Hell's vengeance boils in my heart. She knew these notes. She knew them better than her own name. Elena looked up. She didn't look at Isabella, she looked straight at Julian Blackwood. Does the orchestra know the key? She asked softly. Julian's smile faltered for a moment. What key? Elena asked, her voice gaining a strange resonance, full strength. F minor. Do they know it? The silence in the obsidian hall shifted. It changed from awkward silence, secondary embarrassment, to the hushed silence of unexpected defiance. Julian blinked. He expected her to beg for her job or perhaps stammer apologies. He didn't expect her to ask about the key. These are backup musicians from the New York Philharmonic, Julian replied, his curiosity ignited. He gestured to the quartet and the pianist in the corner. They know it. Elena nodded. She walked to the small stage, her cheap black shoes clicking on the floor, the only sound in the vast room. Don't do this, Elena, a voice screamed in her head. You promised you'd never sing again. You promised you were done with that life. You're Elena Vance, waitress. You're not her anymore. Not her. But the humiliation burned in her chest, the way Isabella looked at her like trash, something to be scraped off a shoe sole. It awakened a dragon that had slept for 3 years. And Julian, his joke was cruel, but in his eyes was a challenge she couldn't resist. He thought she couldn't. As she approached the piano, the pianist, an elderly man named Mr. Henderson, who often gave her good tips, looked at her with pity. Elena, dear, you don't have to do this. Just go to the kitchen. F minor, Mr. Henderson, Elena said. The score lay on the piano lid. She no longer trembled. Quick tempo. Don't wait for me, I'll catch up. Mr. Henderson hesitated, glanced at Julian, who gave a risky nod, then placed his fingers on the keys. The aggressive, stormy introductory chords of the aria rolled through the room. Isabella crossed her arms, a mocking smile plastered on her face, expecting the screeching to begin. Julian leaned against a column, swirling his drink, waiting for the joke to end so he could go home. Elena closed her eyes. She took a breath, then opened her mouth. The first note didn't just come out, it exploded. It was a spear of pure, crystalline sound piercing the air with shocking power. Hell's vengeance boils in my heart. Julian froze mid-sip. The sound was enormous. It wasn't the thin, breathy voice of an amateur, it was a trained operatic voice, rich, dark, and terrifyingly precise. The German diction was impeccable, the emotion was raw, unfiltered fury channeled through perfect technique. Elena no longer stood like a waitress. Her posture changed. Her spine was steel, her arms expressive, clutching the air as she delivered the queen of the night's furious command. Guests at the nearest tables set down their forks, mouths agape. Then came the tricky part. The legendary staccato passage, the high FS. It was a graveyard for sopranos, where even professionals cracked. Elena hit the first high note with laser precision. Ah, 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 ah. It was flawless. It was crystal clear, resonant, and effortless. She spiraled through the arpeggios, her voice dancing with terrifying agility. She didn't just hit the notes, she attacked them. She poured 3 years of scrubbing floors, 3 years of hiding, 3 years of invisibility into a melody that demanded dominance. A chill ran through Julian Blackwood. The hairs on his arms stood up. He had grown up in opera boxes. His grandmother was a patron of the Metropolitan Opera. He knew what greatness sounded like. This wasn't just good, it was world-class. It was impossible. He looked at the woman he had just mocked. Disheveled bun, stained apron, cheap shoes, all of it seemed to vanish. All he saw was power radiating from her throat. She glowed with fierce, terrifying beauty. Isabella Thorne paled. The smirk vanished, replaced by an expression of absolute horror. She no longer looked at a waitress, she looked at a rival. Elena hit the final resolving cadence, holding the last note with lung capacity that defied logic, letting the sound ring through the crystal chandeliers until the very air seemed to vibrate. Then she cut it off. Silence. Absolute, suffocating silence. It lasted 5 seconds, 10 seconds. No one moved. Pianist Mr. Henderson stared at his keys, his hands trembling. Elena stood there, breathing heavily, adrenaline coursing through her system. The spell broke. The reality of what she had just done flooded her. She had exposed herself. She looked at Julian. He was no longer smiling. He was no longer bored. He was staring at her with an intensity that weakened her knees. His dark eyes were wide, burning with a mix of shock and something else, hunger. Slowly, Julian Blackwood began to clap. Just him. A slow, rhythmic clap. Then a man at table 4 joined in. Then the whole room. Within moments, New York's wealthy elite rose to their feet, erupting in thunderous applause, forgetting she was the help, forgetting the spilled wine. Isabella stood unmoving, her face a mask of fury. She grabbed Julian's arm. Stop. Stop clapping. She's just a trick pony. Julian shook her off without looking at her. He headed to the stage, moving like a predator stalking prey. Elena saw him coming. Panic gripped her. He knows, or he'll find out who you are. Who are you? Julian asked when he reached the edge of the stage. His voice was rough, stripped of its usual smooth tone. That wasn't a waitress singing. Who are you? Elena stepped back, clutching her apron. I should get back to work. The deal was real, Julian said, stepping onto the stage. He was inches from her. She could smell his cologne, sandalwood and rain. I said if you sang it, I'd marry you. The crowd hushed, eagerly awaiting the billionaire's next move. Elena looked him in the eyes. I think we both know, Mr. Blackwood, that rich people make promises they never intend to keep. She turned and fled. She didn't walk, she sprinted off the stage, through the service door to the kitchen, leaving Julian Blackwood standing alone under the spotlight, staring at the empty space where she had been, looking more alive than he had in years. Find her, Julian said to his bodyguard, who appeared beside him. Sir. Find out who she is, Julian ordered, his voice dark. And bring her to my office tomorrow morning. Whether she's fired or not, find her. Elena Vance didn't stop running until her lungs burned and the glittering skyline of Uptown was replaced by the grimy brick facades of Hell's Kitchen. She fumbled for her keys, her hands shaking so badly she dropped them twice before unlocking the peeling blue door of apartment 4B. She slammed it shut and leaned against it, sliding down until she hit the floor. The cheap laminate cooled her skin but couldn't cool the fire in her veins. She had sung. After 3 years of silence, after 3 years of burying Elena Vankova, the prodigy, the rising star, the girl who was supposed to be the next Maria Callas, she had sung before half of New York's high society. And worse, she had sung for Julian Blackwood. Elena. Is that you? A soft, raspy voice came from the bedroom. Elena closed her eyes, gathering her strength. She stood, smoothed her stained apron, and entered the small room. In the bed, surrounded by pill bottles and a humming dialysis machine, lay her younger brother Leo. He was pale, his skin translucent under the harsh overhead light, but his eyes were bright. "Hey," Elena whispered, forcing a smile. "I'm home." "You're early," Leo said, coughing slightly. "Did Mr. Marcus let you go?" "Something like that," Elena lied. She sat on the edge of the bed, brushing hair from his forehead. I quit." Leo's eyes widened. "Elena." "The rent, my treatment. I'll find another job tomorrow," she promised fiercely. "I'll scrub toilets if I have to. Don't worry about the money. I'll get you a kidney, Leo." "I promised." Leo looked at her, seeing through the brave facade. "You look different. You look like before. Before Mom's death, before the scandal." Elena turned away. The scandal. The night her life fell apart. The night her voice cracked during a performance at the conservatory because her water had been spiked, ruining her debut and scholarship in one fell swoop. The rumors that followed, drug use, instability, were planted by a rival. She lost her reputation, her funding, and then her mother to a heart attack caused by the stress of the debts. She had sworn never to sing again. Singing was dangerous. Singing destroyed things. "Go to sleep, Leo." She kissed his forehead. "I need to think about something." On the other side of the city, in the Blackwood Tower penthouse, the atmosphere was far less homey. Julian Blackwood stood gazing at the city lights, a glass of whiskey in hand. The penthouse was cold, modern, and empty, like his life. "Sir, I have the dossier," said Arthur, Julian's head of security and personal investigator. He placed a thin folder on the glass table. Julian turned. "That was quick." "It wasn't hard to find once we ran facial recognition on public records," Arthur said. "Her name is Elena Vance, age 24. Currently, or formerly, employed as a waitress at Obsidian Hall. Lives in Hell's Kitchen with her younger brother Leo, who has end-stage kidney failure." Julian picked up the folder. He opened it. No criminal record? None. But here's the interesting part. Arthur pointed to a clipped newspaper article from 3 years ago. Before she was Elena Vance, waitress, she was Elena Vancouver, scholarship student at Juilliard. Soprano. Best in her class. Julian's eyes narrowed as he read the headline. Prodigies fall. Vancouver cracks on stage amid drug rumors. "She didn't crack," Julian murmured, recalling the sound of her voice in the restaurant. "This woman has ice water in her veins. You don't sing the Queen of the Night like that if you're unstable." "There's more," Arthur added. "The rumors that ruin her career, they trace back to a PR firm owned by the family." Julian froze. "Thorne? Like Isabella?" "Isabella's father owns the firm. Isabella was also a student at the conservatory that year. A mezzo-soprano who didn't quite make the cut for solos." A dark, cold rage settled in Julian's chest. It all made sense. Isabella, with her petty jealousies and endless resources, had crushed a rival before she could even rise. And tonight, unknowingly, Isabella had tried to do it again. Julian closed the folder. The image of Elena standing on that stage, defiant and magnificent, burned in his mind. He looked at the engagement ring Isabella had thrown back at him in a fit of rage earlier that evening. She had hurled it at his head in the limo. He picked up the ring. It meant nothing to him. The merger with Thorne Industries was the only reason he'd proposed. His board of directors was pressuring him to settle down, to present a stable image, to calm investors. They wanted a Blackwood wife. But the contract didn't specify she had to be Isabella Thorne. "Arthur," Julian said, a plan forming in his mind, a reckless, dangerous, and utterly perfect plan. "Prepare the car. It's 2 a.m, sir." "I know." Julian buttoned his tuxedo jacket. "We are going to Hell's Kitchen." The knock on the door was heavy, authoritative. It wasn't the landlord asking for rent, it was the knock of someone who owned the building. Elena jumped from the couch where she was counting crumpled dollars. She grabbed the baseball bat she kept by the umbrella stand and crept to the door. "Who is it?" "Julian Blackwood." The name hit her harder than the bat could. She froze. "Go away." "Miss Vance, I'm not here to fire you. I own the restaurant building, but I don't manage the staff. Open the door, or I'll have my security team break the lock. We need to talk. Elena weighed her options. She unlatched the chain and swung the door open. Come in. She didn't offer him a seat. The couch was piled with laundry, so they stood in the tiny living room. What do you want? Elena asked, crossing her arms. You already had your fun tonight. You proved your point to your fiancé. Leave me alone. She's no longer my fiancé, Julian said calmly. I ended the engagement an hour ago. Elena blinked. Congratulations. What does that have to do with me? Everything. Julian began pacing the small room, his presence filling the space. You see, Elena, I have a problem. My grandfather's trust, which controls the majority of Blackwood Dynamics shares, has one condition. I must be married by my 33rd birthday to gain full control of the company. That birthday is in 3 weeks. Sounds like a rich person's problem, Elena said dryly. It is. But if I don't marry, the board can oust me. They pushed for Isabella because her father is an influential ally. But I can't marry Isabella. She's toxic. I'd have told you that. Yes. Julian stopped pacing and looked at her. I was joking tonight, Elena. I said sing it and I'll marry you. You sang. You fulfilled the terms. Elena laughed, a sharp, incredulous sound. You're insane. You can't be serious. I'm a businessman, Elena. I deal in transactions. He stepped closer. I need a wife. A wife who's smart, composed, and who, frankly, has reason to hate the Thorne family as much as I do now. I need someone who can play the role of Mrs. Blackwood for 1 year. After that, we divorce. I keep my company, you get a settlement. I'm not a prop, Elena spat. I'm not for sale. Everyone has a price, Julian said coldly. He pulled a checkbook from his inner pocket. He uncapped a pen. How much does Leo's surgery cost? The best specialists, post-op care. Elena fell silent. Leo's name hung in the air. I can transfer him to a private wing at Mount Sinai by morning, Julian said, his voice softening. I can get him the top kidney specialist in the country. I can erase your debt. I can give you your life back. Elena stared at the checkbook. It was a deal with the devil, she knew it. Julian Blackwood was dangerous. He was manipulating her desperation. But then she thought of Leo coughing in the next room. She thought of 3 years of struggling. What are the terms? She whispered. Julian didn't smile. This was business. We marry secretly within 3 days. Then a public wedding in 2 weeks. You live in my penthouse. You attend galas, dinners, board meetings. You play the role of the woman who swept me off my feet. You make Isabella Thorne a distant memory. About singing? Elena asked. Only if you want to. But I suspect, Elena, that suppressing that voice is what's really killing you. Elena looked at her hands. 1 year. $10 million at the end of the contract. Plus all expenses for your brother, no matter what happens to us. Elena took a shaky breath. She looked at the man who had humiliated her, then defended her, and now offered to save her. Write it down, she said. Pardon. A contract, Elena said, her eyes fierce. I want it in writing. I want a clause that says we have separate bedrooms. This is a business arrangement, Mr. Blackwood. I'm not your mistress, I'm your employee. Julian's lips twitched, and a spark of genuine amusement and respect lit in his eyes. Isabella had thrown herself at him. Elena was building walls. Agreed, Julian said. Arthur is waiting outside with the documents. Let's go. Elena glanced at her brother's bedroom door. I need 10 minutes to pack. No rush, Julian said. Welcome to the family, future Mrs. Blackwood. The twist begins. 3 days later, the ceremony at City Hall was quick and impersonal. No cameras, just Arthur as witness. But the real storm started the following Monday. Elena stood in the dressing room of Julian's penthouse, staring at rows of designer clothes delivered that morning. She no longer wore a waitress uniform. She wore a tailored navy suit and pants, looking every bit the billionaire's wife. Julian entered, adjusting his tie. He stopped when he saw her. For a moment, he forgot about the merger, the board, and the lies. She looked stunning. Ready? He asked. For what? Elena asked. The press conference, Julian said, handing her a pair of sunglasses. We are announcing the engagement and wedding date. Isabella will be there. Everyone will be there, Julian replied grimly. Elena, there's one thing I forgot to mention. Elena looked at him sharply. What? My grandmother, the Blackwood family matriarch. She's flying in from Paris. Julian winced a bit. She's the one who controls the trust. She's terrifying and hates liars. If she suspects for a second that this is fake, the deal's off. I lose the company. You're telling me this now? You handled Mozart's Queen of the Night, Julian said, opening the door. I figured you could handle an 80-year-old woman with a cane. You have no idea, Elena muttered, putting on the sunglasses. They entered the private elevator. As the doors closed, Julian reached out and took her hand. His skin was warm. Showtime, Mrs. Blackwood, he whispered. The elevator descended, carrying them to the lobby where a shark pit of reporters and a vengeful Isabella Thorne waited to tear them apart. The elevator doors dinged, signaling their arrival at the lobby level. It was a sound that usually meant freedom, but today it rang like the bell at the start of a boxing match. Chin up, Julian murmured, his hand protectively on Elena's back. Don't let them see you bleed. The doors slid open, and the world turned white. Hundreds of camera flashes fired at once, a blinding assault that dazed Elena instantly. The roar of questions was deafening. Mr. Blackwood, is this true? Who is she? What happened to Isabella? Julian moved with the grace of a shark cutting through water, guiding Elena to the podium where a sleek microphone setup waited. Security formed a human wall, holding back the frenzied paparazzi. Elena's heart pounded against her ribs, but her face remained impassive. She was an opera singer. She knew how to wear a mask. She recalled the queens and heroines she had studied for years. I'm not Elena the waitress, she told herself. I'm Elena Blackwood. They reached the podium. Julian raised his hand, and the room silenced instantly. His authority was absolute. Thank you all for coming on such short notice, Julian began, his voice smooth and commanding. I'm here to introduce the woman who has captured my heart. The future Mrs. Blackwood, Elena. He stepped back, letting Elena stand in the light. She adjusted the microphone. Good morning, she said, her trained voice resonating and clear, effortlessly carrying to the back of the room. I know you have questions. I have one, a voice cut in from the side of the stage. The crowd parted as Isabella Thorne strode forward, looking like a vengeful goddess in Saint Laurent. She didn't hold a microphone, but her piercing voice didn't need one. Tell them who you really are, darling. Isabella smirked, stopping just before the security line. She turned to the cameras, holding up an enlarged photograph. It was a grainy image of Elena from 3 years ago, looking disheveled and ill, leaving a hospital after the poisoning incident. This is Elena Vance. Isabella crowed triumphantly. The disgraced Juilliard dropout, a drug addict who couldn't handle the pressure. Julian Blackwood is marrying a junkie waitress from a diner. The room exploded. Reporters pounced on Elena like a pack of wolves. Is this true? Were you in rehab? Julian, did you know? Julian's jaw clenched. He stepped forward to intervene, to whisk Elena away, but she didn't move. She didn't cower. Elena looked at the photo, then at Isabella. She remembered the fear she felt 3 years ago. She remembered the shame. But looking at Isabella now, desperate, cruel, petty, Elena realized she had nothing to be ashamed of. She stepped closer to the microphone. Yes, she said. One word silenced the room again. Isabella blinked, her mocking smile wavered. She expected denial. My name was Elena Vance, Elena continued, her voice gaining strength, ringing with the same intensity as the aria. And yes, 3 years ago, I was hospitalized, not because I was a drug addict, but because on the night of my debut, someone spiked my water with sedatives to ensure I failed. She looked straight at Isabella. The cameras followed her gaze. Isabella paled. I lost my scholarship, Elena said, her voice trembling with restrained emotion. I lost my career. I spent 3 years scrubbing floors and waiting tables to pay my brother's medical bills because my mother died of a broken heart trying to clear my name. I'm not a waitress, and I'm proud of that, because while people like Miss Thorne bought dresses worth more than my rent, I learned what it means to survive. She took a breath and looked at Julian for the first time. He was staring at her with something akin to awe. Mr. Blackwood didn't fall for a socialite, Elena finished, turning back to the press. He fell for a survivor. If anyone has a problem with my past, you can discuss it with my husband. She stepped back. For a moment, there was silence. Then a lone reporter from the Times shouted, "This is a better story than the merger. Look here, Mrs. Blackwood." The cameras flashed again, but the energy had shifted. They were no longer attacking, they were adoring. The narrative of the survivor Cinderella was gold. Isabella stood frozen, realizing she had just handed her enemy a victory. Julian leaned in, his lips brushing her ear. "That was magnificent." "Get me out of here," Elena whispered back, her legs finally starting to tremble. "I think I'm going to throw up." Julian wrapped his arm around her waist, shielding her from the stairs. "Arthur, the car." Now. 2 weeks passed in a blur of dress fittings, florists, and legal briefings. Elena moved into the penthouse, but true to the contract, she slept in the guest wing. However, the boundaries blurred. They breakfasted together. They argued politics over late-night tea. Julian discovered that his waitress wife had a sharp mind, an intellect matching his own. But the final test came on a rainy Tuesday evening. Grande Marie Genevieve Blackwood arrived from Paris. Dinner was held in the penthouse's private dining room. The table was set with Blackwood silver dating back to the 19th century. Genevieve sat at the head, a small woman with silver hair and eyes that could cut glass. She used her cane not for walking but for pointing at things she disapproved of. So far, she disapproved of the soup, too salty, the weather, too American, and the floral arrangement, too garish. Elena sat to her right, dressed in a modest emerald gown. Julian sat opposite, looking unusually tense. "So," Genevieve said, setting down her spoon with a clatter, "you're a singer waitress." "I am," Elena replied evenly. "And you think you can handle the Blackwood estate? You think you can manage the board with sheer grit?" Genevieve's eyes narrowed. "My grandson is impulsive. He likes shiny new toys. But marriage is an institution. Play nice, grandmother," Julian warned. "Hush, Julian. I'm speaking to the girl." Genevieve turned her gaze back to Elena. "Tell me, child, what do you know about running a household of this scale?" Elena looked at the formidable woman. She saw the test. Genevieve didn't care about origins, she cared about competence. "I know your tea is cold, madam," Elena said softly. Genevieve blinked. "Pardon." Elena stood. She didn't ring for staff. She walked to the sideboard where a silver tea server stood. "The maid poured the water too early," Elena explained, checking the teapot. "Blackwood tradition calls for Earl Grey, doesn't it? Earl Grey turns bitter if steeped too long and loses its profile if served below 90 degrees. Elena deftly dumped the old water, reboiled the kettle on the induction plate, and prepared a fresh pot with practiced, fluid motions, her hands moving with the efficiency of someone who had done it 10,000 times, but with an artist's flair. She poured a cup and set it perfectly before Genevieve, the handle facing 3 o'clock. "You're worried I can't manage staff or details," Elena said, sitting again. "Madam, I've spent 3 years serving the most demanding people in New York. I know how to anticipate needs before they're voiced. I know details are the difference between a meal and an experience. A socialite assumes everything will be done. A waitress ensures it is." Genevieve stared at the tea. She took a sip. Silence stretched across the table. Julian held his breath. "It's perfect," Genevieve whispered. She looked at Elena, a small, genuine smile cracking her stern face. "You have the hands of a worker and the posture of a queen. Perhaps Julian isn't as foolish as I thought." Julian exhaled the breath he didn't know he was holding. "Does that mean she has your blessing?" he asked. "We'll see," Genevieve said, tapping her cane. "But she survived dinner. That's a start." Later that night, the tension from grandmother's visit gave way to something else. Elena was on the balcony, watching the rain beat against the glass. She sensed a presence behind her. "You were incredible tonight," Julian said. He wasn't wearing his jacket, his tie was loosened. He looked human. "She hasn't complimented anyone since 1998. She just respects hard work," Elena said, not turning. "Rich people usually don't get that." "Is that what you think of me?" Julian asked, stepping closer. "That I'm just a rich person?" Elena turned. He was close, too close. The city lights reflected in his dark eyes. "I think you're a man who's used to buying what he wants," Elena said, her voice trembling slightly. "I think you're confusing yourself with what you bought." "I'm not confused, Elena." Julian reached out, his hand brushing her cheek. His touch sent a shockwave through her. "When I saw you on that stage, when I heard you sing, that wasn't a transaction. It was the first time in my life I felt something real." "Julian, the contract." "Damn the contract," he whispered. He leaned in. Elena froze, her mind telling her to pull away, to remember this was fake, that in 11 months she'd walk away. But her heart, her treacherous heart, leaned forward, and their lips met. It wasn't a polite, staged kiss for the cameras. It was hungry. It was desperate. It was a release of weeks of pent-up adrenaline and hidden attraction. Julian kissed her as if he wanted to consume her. Elena kissed him back with the passion of an opera singer. For a moment, the lie vanished. It was just them. But the moment was shattered by Julian's cell phone ringing. Julian pulled away, breathless, his forehead pressed to hers. "Ignore it. It's your private line," Elena whispered, her pulse racing. "You should answer." Julian groaned and pulled the phone from his pocket. He looked at the screen, his face turned icy. "What is it?" Elena asked, sensing the shift. "It's Arthur," Julian said, his voice flat. "He says there's been a break-in at the law firm holding our marriage contract." Elena's blood ran cold. "The contract is gone," Julian said, staring at her in horror. "Someone stole the hard copy, the one outlining the payments, the fake dates, everything that proves this marriage is a sham." "Isabella," Elena exhaled. "If she leaks it to the press or my grandmother," Julian said, gripping the phone until his knuckles whitened, "I lose the company, and you look like a gold-digging hire to marry me." "The wedding's in 2 days," Elena said, panic rising. "What do we do?" Julian looked at her, the softness gone, replaced by the ruthless CEO. But this time, he wasn't fighting against her. "We go on the offensive," Julian vowed. "She wants to ruin the wedding?" "Let her try. But she forgets one thing. She's dealing with the Blackwoods now." "Now," Julian said, taking Elena's hand. "My wife." Julian Blackwood and Elena Vance's wedding was hyped as the event of the decade. St. Patrick's Cathedral was filled with 1,500 guests, a sea of high fashion, old money, and political power. Outside, streets were blocked off as thousands of onlookers and a legion of press tried to catch a glimpse of the Cinderella bride. Inside the cathedral, the air was thick with the scent of 10,000 white roses and an undercurrent of unbearable tension. Elena stood at the end of the massive nave, her hand linked with Leo's. Her brother, looking healthier than he had in years thanks to the dialysis and top care Julian had arranged, smiled. "You look like an angel, Leo whispered. Elena felt anything but an angel. She wore a custom Vera Wang gown that cost more than she used to earn in 5 years. It was a masterpiece of silk and French lace, perfectly fitted. But beneath the silk, her heart pounded against her ribs like a caged bird. They hadn't found the contract. Arthur's team had scoured the city, but Isabella had vanished, biding her time for the perfect strike. Elena knew with nauseating certainty that the moment was now. As the organ pipes thundered, playing the opening notes of the wedding march, Elena took a deep breath. She wasn't just walking down the aisle, she was walking into a minefield. "Ready?" Leo asked. "No," Elena whispered. "Let's go." The walk felt like an eternity. Every face she passed seemed to analyze and judge her. Do they know? She wondered. Ahead at the altar stood Julian. He looked devastatingly handsome in his morning suit, but his jaw was tight. His eyes found hers, and for a moment, the mask slipped. She saw fear, protective fury, and something else, that raw, hungry look from the balcony. She reached the altar. Leo kissed her cheek and Saturday. Julian took her hand, his grip was firm, almost painful. "She's here," he murmured, barely moving his lips. "Third row, left side, in black." Elena didn't look. She focused on the Archbishop, an imposing figure in golden vestments, who began the ceremony with solemn gravity. The words washed over Elena. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." It all felt unreal, a multi-million-dollar spectacle, and she was the lead actress. Then came the moment they dreaded. If any of you here present knows of any just cause why these two may not lawfully be joined in matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace. Silence filled the vast cathedral. A second passed, then another. Elena almost allowed herself to breathe. Click, click, click. The sound of high heels on marble rang out sharply. I object. Isabella Thorne stepped out from the pew. She wasn't in black, she was in blood red, the same color as the wine spilled that fateful night. She held a manila folder high like a weapon. A collective gasp ran through the church. Cameras whirred in the press gallery. This marriage is a fraud. Isabella's voice screeched, echoing off the vaulted ceiling. She marched down the center aisle toward the altar. It's a business deal designed to deceive the board of directors, and you, Madame Genevieve. Genevieve Blackwood, seated in the front row, froze. Her knuckles whitened on her cane's head. Security. Julian growled. You see this woman? Don't you dare touch me. Isabella snarled at the approaching guards. She ascended the altar steps and waved the documents from the folder. I have proof right here. A marriage contract dated 3 weeks ago. She began reading, her voice dripping venom. Clause 4A. The wife, Elena Vance, agrees to perform spousal duties for no less than 12 months in exchange for a sum of $10 million payable upon divorce. Clause 4B. The husband agrees to cover all medical expenses for the brother. Pandemonium ensued. The cathedral turned into a circus. Reporters shouted questions, guests stood on pews for a better view. Isabella turned to Genevieve, triumph gleaming in her eyes. See? She's a paid companion with a good voice. Julian hired her to secure his inheritance. Genevieve slowly rose. The cathedral instantly quieted. The matriarch looked from Isabella to Julian and finally fixed her gaze on Elena. Her expression was unreadable, terrifying stone. Is this true? Genevieve asked, her voice quiet but piercing in the silence. Julian opened his mouth to lie, to spin it, to do what he always did, win the deal. But Elena stepped in front of him. She looked at the hundreds of besieging faces. She looked at Isabella's malicious grin. She looked at the stained glass window above the altar depicting martyrs who died for their truth. Yes, Elena said, her voice clear, projecting like the queen of the night. The crowd gasped again. Julian looked at her, stunned. Elena descended 2 steps to be level with Isabella, then turned to face Genevieve. Yes, madam, Elena said, holding her head high. Every word in that contract is true. 3 weeks ago, I was drowning. My brother was dying, and I had nothing. Your grandson offered me salvation. $10 million to play a role. I agreed. I'd agree again in a heartbeat to save Leo's life. I'm not ashamed of sacrificing for the people I love. She paused, letting the words sink in. The image of a greedy gold digger began to crack, replaced by something more complex. Then Elena turned to Julian. She ascended back to the altar and took his hands. They were cold. But that was 3 weeks ago, Elena said softly, speaking only to him, ignoring the 1,500 watching. We signed a contract for a performance, Julian. But somewhere between the press conference and the late-night teas and the moment you kissed me on that balcony, I forgot my lines. Julian's eyes widened. Elena turned back to the crowd, her voice building, vibrating with emotion. I stood on a stage in his restaurant, covered in wine, and sang Mozart because I refused to be broken. And Julian Blackwood was the first man in my life who didn't try to silence me. He challenged me to sing louder. She extended her hand and took the contract from Isabella's stunned grasp. Isabella is right. This document says our marriage is a lie. Elena tore the contract in half. The sound was shocking in the cathedral's acoustics. She tore it again and again until the $10 million agreement became confetti at her feet. I don't want the money, Elena declared. I'm dissolving the contract. If you want to marry me, Julian Blackwood, then marry me, the Elena Vance from Hell's Kitchen. No deals, no timelines. Just us. Heavy silence hung in the air. All eyes were on Julian, the billionaire playboy, the man who never did anything without a guaranteed return on investment. Julian looked at the shredded paper on the floor. He looked at Isabella, who was practically vibrating with rage at her plan backfiring. Then he looked at Elena. She was exposed, offering him only truth. Julian smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes, transforming his face. He stepped closer to Elena, invading her space, grabbing her waist with a possessive grip that made the crowd sigh. "You're fired," he whispered hoarsely. Elena's breath hitched. "What?" "As my employee, you're fired." He leaned in, his voice rough with emotion. "But I'd like to hire you for a new position. Permanent. I love you, Elena. I think I fell in love with you the second you hit that high F." He kissed her right there at the altar, before the vows, before God and the paparazzi. It was a scorching, passionate kiss that told the world contracts meant nothing. When they parted, breathless, a slow, rhythmic tapping broke the silence. Tap, tap, tap. Genevieve Blackwood was clapping, slow, deliberate applause. A genuine, amused smile appeared on her stern face. "Well," Genevieve announced to the stunned cathedral, "that was certainly more entertaining than ordinary vows." The girl fired Julian. She tore up $10 million in church. She's either a fool or desperately in love. Either way, she's dangerous enough to be a Blackwood. She waved her cane toward the Archbishop. "Carry on, man, before anyone else interrupts." And Isabella stood there, mouth agape. Her nuclear bomb had turned into a celebratory firework. Julian turned to his head of security, Arthur, standing nearby. "Arthur, escort Miss Thorne out. And hand the press that file we discussed." Arthur nodded grimly. He approached Isabella, pulling a thick envelope from his jacket, the evidence of the doping scandal 3 years ago. Isabella saw the envelope, realized what it was, and blanched. She didn't need escorting. She turned and fled down the aisle, the sound of her defeat echoing off the marble. Half the press corps followed, hungry for her downfall. Julian turned back to Elena, his eyes shining. "Where were we?" Elena smiled, tears finally streaming down her cheeks. "I think we were about to get married." The Archbishop cleared his throat, looking a bit flustered but relieved. "Yes. Do you, Julian Blackwood, take this woman?" The rest of the ceremony was a blur of joy. As they walked back down the aisle as husband and wife, the cheers were deafening, genuine. Elena caught Leo's eye as she passed. He gave her a thumbs up, openly crying. They reached the heavy oak doors of the cathedral. Before stepping out into the world's flashing lights, Julian pulled her into her alcove for 1 second of privacy. "We did it," he breathed against her forehead. "Yes," Elena said, feeling lighter than air. "And so, Mr. Blackwood, what's our first official act as a real married couple?" Julian grinned, that wicked, charming grin that started it all in the obsidian room. "Well, Mrs. Blackwood," he said, opening the cathedral doors to the roar of the city, "I think I owe you a very long, very expensive honeymoon. And after that, I'll buy you an opera house. And there you have it, my friends. How a cursed glass of wine led to the wedding of the century." Elena got not just a billionaire. She reclaimed her voice, saved her brother, and proved that sometimes the biggest risks bring the most beautiful rewards. Isabella Thorne's reputation never recovered, but Elena Blackwood became a legend, not just for her voice, but for the heart that fueled it. If you enjoyed this story of underdog triumph and epic romance, hit the like button right now. It really helps the channel. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications.